everybody. Welcome back to my channel and happy Harloween. It is truly the most wonderful time of the year. Today we are talking about a case that is quite shocking and honestly truly horrifying. In fact, I don't often include trigger warnings, but I will for this video. I will be discussing obviously a horrible crime, but also there's self-harm that is mentioned in this video. I won't be going into great detail, but I do know it can be a sensitive subject for many people. As always, I will not be gratuitous and I will always be respectful, but this information is relevant to the case, so we will be discussing it. Before we dive in, though, let's have a word from the sponsor of today's video, Magellan TV. Magellan TV is a new kind of documentary streaming service, and it is truly television worth watching. Many of you have already been watching Magellan TV. You guys let me know what you've been watching, and I have a recommendation for you today. It's called Lady Killers with Martina Cole. There's 6 episodes in all, and they examine the life and times of the most notorious female serial killers across history. There's episodes in here for Myra Hindley, Rosemary West, but my favorite episode of all was episode 3, the one that discussed Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess, who's a figure in history that I've always been incredibly interested in. With over 3,000 documentary films and series available on Magellan TV right now and more being added every single week, there's sure to be something for everyone. Whether you're interested in true crime, science, history, nature, or really anything else, there's so much to choose from. I can tell you right now, I was just looking at my Magellan TV app and I have 12 things in my queue, like 12 things on my watch list that I want to make sure I watch. And there just doesn't seem to be enough time in the day to watch everything. I always like to have something playing in the background whenever I'm, researching, or if I'm taking a shower or putting on my makeup. I have this mind where I'm constantly distracted, so I need to have something to zone in on and focus in on. I always have to have background noise. Whenever I put Magellan TV on in the background, it can sometimes turn into a great inconvenience because instead of me putting my makeup on for 20 minutes, I stretch it out to 45 minutes or an hour so I can finish watching the film that I started. And that's kind of problematic. That is exactly why I am recording at noon today. At noon instead of 10:30 like I had planned. Because I was watching episode 1 of The Brain That Changes Itself, and episode 1 was 52 minutes, and I had to stretch it out. The best thing is you can watch Magellan TV anytime, anywhere, whether you're sitting at home, cozy on the couch, watching on your smart TV, your Roku, Apple TV, what have you, or you're on the go and you're watching from your tablet or your cell phone. Magellan TV is easy to use and available anytime, anywhere, any place. That means you never have to be without quality documentary content. So if you would like to try Magellan TV out for yourself, there's a link in the description box. Go ahead and click it. You'll get a month free trial of Magellan TV to peruse at your leisure. You're not going to want to cancel after that month because you're going to love it. But if you do want to cancel, you can do that. There's no strings attached. You're not going to be charged. There's no contracts. It's all good. It's literally just a month to try out this content, see Magellan TV for yourself, and realize how much you really love it. Thank you so much to Magellan TV for sponsoring this video. And let's dive in to the second video of Harloween. This is actually four. The second video of Harloween. So we're at the very beginning of Harloween 2021, and I'm so happy to be here with you guys. Harloween gives me a chance to talk about all the things that interest me personally, the spookier side of true crime and life, but I have to be honest, nothing terrifies me more than a person who takes a life simply for the thrill of it. Ghosts, I can handle. I can run right through them. I can just leave their consecrated area of haunting. There's a million things I could do. Vampires, we've got options, right? We've got holy water, we've got crucifixes, garlic, sunlight, werewolves, I mean, come on, silver bullets. There is something for every one of these creepy, crawly, spooky specters. But a true psychopath who hides, who pretends to be normal, and then who attacks? How can you keep yourself safe from that? And I believe that the person we're going to talk about in today's video is one of those incredibly terrifying human beings. Our case today brings us to St. Martin's, Missouri, a small town off the beaten path with a population of 1,140 in 2009 when 9-year-old Elizabeth Olten vanished. St. Martin's is said to be a great place to live and to raise children with a low cost of living and a high quality of life. There's virtually no violent crime there, and it's considered generally to be a safe, small town where everyone knows everyone. Elizabeth Olten was a 4th grader who lived with her mother Patty, her brother Anthony, and her sister Stephanie in St. Martin's. On Wednesday, October 21st, 2009, Elizabeth got home from school and began rehearsing for a school play while her mother started preparing dinner. Looking back, Elizabeth's mother Patty said, quote, "She was going to be in a play at school, so she was practicing her lines and doing her little songs and irritating her brother." End quote. At around 5 p.m., there was a knock on the door, and Patty opened it to find their neighbor and Elizabeth's friend standing outside, wanting to know if Elizabeth could play. Emma Bustamante was a 6-year-old girl who lived with her siblings and grandparents 4 houses down from the Oltens, and she and Elizabeth would often play at each other's houses or in the large expanse of woods located behind their homes. At first, Patty said no, because dinner was going to be ready soon, but when the 2 young girls began to beg her, she finally gave in, but she instructed Elizabeth to be home by 6 p.m. for dinner. Patty would never see her 9-year-old daughter alive again. When Elizabeth was not home by 6, Patty began to worry. It was October, so the sun had already begun to set by then, and it was getting dark outside. Elizabeth loved animals. She loved the color pink. She loved putting on fancy dresses, but she was terrified of the dark, so she would always be home before night fell. Patty decided to call over to Emma's house, like you would as a parent. If you told your kid to be home at a certain time, the kid doesn't come home, you're going to call the parents of the kid your kid is playing with and say, "Hey, can you send Elizabeth home? I told her to be home by 6. It's dinner time. She's not here." Emma's grandmother, Karen Brooke, answered the phone. And when Patty asked if Karen could send Elizabeth home, Karen was confused. And she said that her granddaughter Emma was home, but Elizabeth had never been there. Sure that something was wrong, Patty hung up and called the police, panicked that she could not find her daughter and worried that Elizabeth may have gotten lost in the dark on her way home. The police arrived quickly, bringing with them volunteers from the fire department, and they began to walk through the neighborhood and the surrounding woods yelling Elizabeth's name, but they found no sign of her. Patty began calling Elizabeth's cell phone repeatedly, which was still on, but every call went right to voicemail. Now there's going to be people out there who are like, why does this girl have a cell phone? She's 9, but the reason that Elizabeth had a cell phone was because her mother, Patty, was very protective and very worried, and she knew that Elizabeth liked to go outside and play with the neighborhood kids, but she wanted to make sure she was always able to contact her. By 10 p.m., word had spread through the small, close-knit town, and hundreds of residents came out in the cold, damp darkness, hoping to find the missing 9-year-old hiding somewhere, scared but unharmed. They spread out and searched the woods, worried that as temperatures dropped, little Elizabeth would be getting cold. But as they searched through the night, it became more clear that Elizabeth was not hiding somewhere, scared. She'd completely vanished. When there was still no sign of her the next day, law enforcement began pinging her cell phone, which acted as a location device as long as it remained powered on. The phone pings led back to the 60 acres of woods behind Elizabeth's home, but this was a very large area, so law enforcement brought in cadaver dogs, helicopters, and dive teams to search the woods, ponds, and rivers, and search teams on foot combed through the trees acre by acre, but they found no sign of Elizabeth Olten, and eventually the battery on her cell phone died, and the last beacon of hope to finding her location went dark. Initially, law enforcement had considered the worst, or at least what they considered to be the worst at that point. before realizing that it could get so much worse. They assumed that Elizabeth had been snatched, kidnapped by some nefarious predator under the cover of dark, and the question of whether or not the other children of St. Martin's were safe was on everyone's mind. But then they checked Elizabeth's cell phone records and found that the last call she'd received the night she'd gone missing had been from a 15-year-old girl named Alyssa Bustamante, the older sister of Elizabeth's friend and neighbor, Emma. It was at that point the police realized that they needed to look at things a different way, the way they would if Elizabeth had been an adult who had gone missing. They needed to go through the events of her last 24 hours, find out who she had spoken to, what she had done, and then question those people. They started with the person who had last seen Elizabeth, Emma Bustamante. A child counselor was brought in. This was someone who was trained to question minors during police investigations, and Emma was 6, so that's very appropriate. And at first, Emma told a very simple story. She claimed that she and Elizabeth had been together. They had played outside for about an hour, and then they parted ways, so Elizabeth could go home in time for dinner. But then, young Emma changed her story, and she claimed she and Elizabeth had been playing in the woods, but Emma had gotten caught on a thorn bush, which was very painful, so she called out to her older sister, Alyssa. Now, that name was familiar and significant to law enforcement already, since they knew that Alyssa had called Elizabeth the night she went missing. 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante was also known to spend a lot of time in the woods. She was an outdoor type of girl, and she would constantly be out there climbing trees and exploring in the rain, sun, or snow. So she was very familiar with the woods. Some said she knew them like the back of her hand. The night Elizabeth went missing, Alyssa's grandparents, Karen and Gary Brooke, questioned her on whether or not she had seen Elizabeth that day, but she just brushed them off, and she said that Elizabeth had gone home. Then Karen Brooke and Alyssa went to a dance at their church, and the Brookes thought nothing more about it. Alyssa may have been struggling under the weight of some issues, but she wasn't a bad girl, and she and her siblings always played with the Olten children who were around their same ages. But when Alyssa was questioned by law enforcement, the truth would come out, and the truth was not what anyone was ready to hear. 9-year-old Elizabeth Olten had not been snatched by some predator. She wasn't even that far from home. But she was no longer alive, having been beaten, strangled, stabbed, and in a final act of violence, had her throat slit from ear to ear. And this hadn't been done at the hands of some ex-convict child predator. Elizabeth had been killed by her neighbor, 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante, who would later tell police she had done it because she wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. Alyssa Bustamante was born on January 28, 1994. Her grandmother, Karen, was present at her birth, and she was actually the one who cut the umbilical cord. Karen said that Alyssa was the teeniest, sweetest baby, and for her, it was love at first sight. But Alyssa's own parents seemed to be less in love. They seemed to be less interested in having a baby around. It has been reported that Alyssa's parents, Michelle and Cesar Bustamante, were cousins by marriage. I don't know how accurate that is. I read it in 2 separate sources, but only 2. So I'm just going to say that I don't know if it's true. Alyssa's mother, Michelle, was only 15 years old when she got pregnant with Alyssa. Michelle would go on to give birth to twin boys 5 years later and a younger daughter named Emma after that. The family moved around California a lot, never able to stay in one place because life for the Bustamantes was unstable due to the behavior and activities of Michelle and Cesar, who both racked up criminal records. Michelle had 3 misdemeanor criminal convictions, including one for drunken driving and another for marijuana possession, and Cesar was sentenced to 10 years in prison for an undisclosed assault charge. However, one of Alyssa's friends from middle school, Jennifer Meyer, told CrimeSider that Cesar had been arrested for stabbing someone, but the local police did not deny or confirm this allegation. Before he went to prison, Cesar and Michelle were heavily into drugs, and they drank far too much, and Cesar would often become physically abusive with the mother of his children. When he was locked up, though, things did not get better. Michelle was unable to pay rent. She was addicted to drugs. She was also still drinking, and they were constantly getting evicted, having to pick up and move. So there was really no stability in this home, nor was there any attention paid to Alyssa and her 3 younger siblings. Michelle's parents, Karen and Gary Brooke, tried to help by sending food and visiting their grandchildren often, but it was like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. Karen and Gary decided it would be better if Michelle and the kids lived closer so that they could help more. So they got the little family a trailer near to where they lived in California, but this almost made things worse. This kind of made Michelle feel that she could be more absent because someone was close by to pick up the slack. She started dating a known drug dealer, and she would go off and disappear for days on a drug binge. When Alyssa was 6, she witnessed her mother overdose in front of her. Alyssa and her siblings were left to fend for themselves for the most part, which of course meant that they usually weren't getting enough to eat, and they had this constant air of neglect about them that many children in this situation have. You can see it. It's a beaten look in their eyes. They look like they're not getting taken care of at home. They may look dirty. They may have messy hair that's not getting brushed and done in the morning. They may be not brushing their teeth, things like that. They just sort of had this wild, unkempt look. One day, Karen Brooke sent her husband Gary over to check on Michelle and the kids, and he came back telling his wife that things were really bad. He had gone into the trailer. He said his daughter Michelle was there, but she wasn't really there, which makes me feel that she was passed out from drugs or alcohol. He said there were beer cans all over the floor. There was no food in the refrigerator, and their daughter Michelle was pretty much just passed out while her children destroyed the place around her. Gary said that the twin boys especially were out of control. In fact, he called them feral. Gary said they were absolutely wild. They would sleep on the floor, they refused to sleep in a bed, and even though they were only 3 years old at this time, they were punching holes into the walls. After a year of this, Michelle's parents realized that their daughter was not going to step up and be a parent to her children, at least not yet. She was not ready, she wasn't there, maybe she hadn't hit rock bottom, but it wasn't going to do any good to just wait for her to suddenly become Mother of the Year. So in 2001, their local sheriff's office advised the Brookes to petition for full custody of Alyssa and her 3 younger siblings. So when Alyssa was 8, she left her mother and began to live with her grandparents, which I'm sure was a much better home situation, but at such a young age, it probably felt a lot like abandonment. The number of children being removed from their homes due to parental drug abuse has doubled since 2014. According to the NIH, the family remains a primary source of attachment, nurturing, and socialization for children. So when that family is plagued by drug or alcohol addiction, which leads to other issues such as unmet developmental needs, impaired attachment, economic hardship, emotional distress, and legal battles, children in these homes grow up not knowing what is safe and what isn't, and not really understanding boundaries. They also grow up with strong feelings of abandonment and guilt, which can lead them to feel that they are worthless because if their own parents don't care about them, well, who the hell should? We discussed this a bit in our serial killers video, but children are very focused on 2 things. They're focused on why things happen, and they're focused on themselves because they're self-centered, as they should be at a young age. But because of these 2 important things in their heads, wondering why things are happening and also mainly focusing on themselves, they tend to identify themselves as the source of whatever problem exists. And they think it's their fault that their parents don't want them. About a year after getting custody, Karen and Gary Brooke decided to leave California and move to St. Martin's, Missouri, feeling that the kids, their grandchildren, would have a better chance at a normal life in a more rural area where there was space to run and play and be kids. They bought a nice little house located on a large ranch, and the children seemed to thrive there, especially the twin boys, who once they had a lot of space to run in, trees to climb, stuff to jump on and jump off, they turned into actually well-behaved little boys who slept in beds under the care and attention of their grandparents. But it seemed that maybe Alyssa had experienced and seen too much in her young life. When she was 8 and her grandparents first took her in, they recalled that she would behave like a 4-year-old. They said they would go out shopping and Alyssa would get down on her hands and knees, pretending to be different animals, and crawl around making animal noises. Or she would run through the aisles and clothing racks, knocking things down and making scenes. They said other shoppers at the store would look at Gary and Karen as if they were wondering, isn't she a bit too old to be acting this way? Why don't you stop this? But the Brooks claimed there was no stopping it. Alyssa was holding on to far too much trauma, and acting out was the only way she knew how to behave. It was the only way she could bring herself some sort of peace, I guess. Alyssa's grandfather, Gary, said, quote, "She'd never talked about what her core issues were because we know she had experienced bad things before we got her, and she would never talk about it. But because of that background, she thought all adults were the enemy and therefore could not be confided in." End quote. It didn't really help that Alyssa's mother, Michelle, had promised to visit her children regularly once they were in Missouri, but she never kept that promise, and Karen Brooke believes this left Alyssa feeling abandoned all over again. Karen recalled walking by Alyssa's room and seeing her cuddled under the blankets of her bed, sobbing, feeling hopeless that her mother was never coming back and they would never be a family again. Alyssa's coping mechanisms went from acting out in stores to things that were much darker and much more damaging. She started popping pills. Basically, she would take anything she could get her hands on, and she began having violent and suicidal thoughts. Alyssa began to live something of a double life. At school, she was well-liked, she dressed normally, she wore very light makeup, and she was considered to be bright. She was in the top third of her class, and she never allowed her grades to drop below a B. Her teachers said Alyssa was smart and never had behavioral problems. But when the eyes of adults were not on her, Alyssa was a different person, as we can see from her active social media presence. She had a YouTube channel, and in her About section, she listed her hobbies as cutting and killing people, and she gave her location as somewhere I don't want to be. Her profile pictures show her posing, her teeth bared, with red lipstick smeared all over her mouth and chin, designed to look like blood. And as she showed off her dark kabuki-style eye makeup in these pictures, scars on her arms and wrists can be seen, scars that were self-inflicted. On her Twitter page, Alyssa talked about depression, addiction, and terror, saying, quote, "All I want in life is a reason for all this pain." End quote. Her friends at school also remembered being creeped out by some of the things she would ask them. One of the questions Alyssa asked was, had her friends ever wondered what it was like to kill someone? And another friend remembered being at Alyssa's house for her birthday party when Alyssa took her aside and said, quote, "I just wonder what it would be like to kill someone, see the life just drain out of someone. I wonder what it would feel like, that type of power, to take that away from someone." End quote.
I mean, did she ever talk about wanting to hurt people?
No, just kind of in a joking manner, but not actually at one specific time, it was on her birthday. I was at her party and she kind of just took me off to the side randomly and she's like, I wonder what it would be like to kill somebody, because I guess she was mad at one of her friends there, but it just seemed kind of strange, but you wouldn't logically think one of your friends would kill somebody, So.
And this was at what birthday party? How old were you?
This year. It was in January.
In January, she came to you and said, I wonder what it'd be like to kill someone. How did you respond?
I just kind of looked at her, and I was like, "Are you serious?" And she said, "Yeah," and then she just kind of walked away, and I was like, I thought it was kind of strange, but I didn't think anything of it afterwards.
Did you ever hear her speak of that again between then and...
No, she would get mad at people, and I know that she would hit her sister a lot and get mad at her, but I don't think that she would actually, kill somebody up until what happened.
But these friends said for the most part, they didn't take her seriously. Alyssa had a habit of saying dark things like this, but she would revert to behaving completely normally when the shock on the faces of her friends registered. She realized she'd gone too far. In a video on her YouTube channel titled "Idiots Getting Electrocuted by an Electric Fence," Alyssa can be seen with her 2 younger twin brothers. They are playing at a horse paddock near their grandparents' home, and Alyssa urges her brothers to touch the electric fence, saying to the camera, "This is where it gets good. This is where my brothers get hurt."
You grab it now. You grab it. Come on, okay, grab it. Come on, it hurts. Oh. Come on, leave it. Really hard. That was good.
Many experts have looked at this as well as Alyssa's other behaviors, and these experts feel that Alyssa had a sadistic need to hurt others, and she got a lot of pleasure and release from doing this. She got the same pleasure and release when she hurt herself. By the time she was 15, Alyssa had no less than 300 self-inflicted cuts on her body. They were mostly slashes to her arms and wrists, but she had also carved words into her body, words like hate and pain, accompanied by pictures of a pentagram, a heart with a line through it signifying a broken heart, and an upside-down peace sign. Cutting would give Alyssa temporary relief from the emotional turmoil inside of her, but this peace was short-lived, and without fail, it always came back, triggering an endless cycle of self-harm and self-loathing. Alyssa would also burn herself with matches and leave bite marks on her own skin. Alyssa's friend Jennifer Meyer claimed to know that Alyssa was cutting because she noticed the scars on her arms, and Alyssa talked about suicide sometimes. Jennifer said Alyssa had even attempted suicide a few times. One of these times had been over Labor Day weekend when Alyssa was 13. She had swallowed an entire bottle of Tylenol, and she was found passed out in the bathroom by her grandmother, Karen, who then called an ambulance. Alyssa was taken to the hospital. Her stomach was pumped. Thankfully, she was okay. She didn't suffer any permanent organ damage. But from the hospital, Alyssa was sent to a mental health facility where she stayed for 2 months. She claimed she'd been so depressed, she didn't even want to get out of bed. She just wanted to die. And even though she was so young at this time, Alyssa was put on 20 milligrams of Prozac daily. She began to see several counselors and therapists and underwent intensive outpatient treatment. So when law enforcement was finally able to sit down with Alyssa Bustamante and ask her questions about her missing 9-year-old neighbor, Alyssa was completely calm and collected the entire time. She showed no signs of distress or concern. She spoke evenly as she sat down with the FBI and claimed she had no idea what had happened to Elizabeth Olten. Alyssa also told the police, I skipped school today, I wasn't at school, but I have no idea what happened to Elizabeth. She was playing with my sister, and then she went home. During the interview, some searchers who were in the woods came across what they believed was a freshly dug hole, a shallow grave, but there was nothing inside the hole. The FBI was notified of this discovery, and when they were notified of this discovery, they happened to be interviewing Alyssa, so they brought Alyssa along with them to the woods. Missouri Highway Patrol Sergeant David Rice was already there with the forensics team when he saw 2 FBI agents walk up with a teenage girl, and he overheard this teenage girl, aka Alyssa, tell the agents that she liked to dig holes in the woods and bury dead animals in them. And obviously, this comment, combined with the calm, matter-of-fact way in which Alyssa said it, raised some red flags for law enforcement. So they decided to get a warrant so they could search Alyssa's home with a special focus on her bedroom. When the evidence agent opened the door to Alyssa's bedroom, it was a terrifying sight. Nothing like they had expected the bedroom of a 15-year-old girl to look like. The walls were covered in crude pictures and writings. Some of the writings looked like they were made with pen or marker. Others looked as if they had been written in blood. There was also a stick figure drawing of a person with slash marks through their head and arms, and the name Emma was written next to it. Emma was Alyssa's 6-year-old sister. There were letters and cards taped to the walls, things sent from her father Caesar, who was still in prison. They also found a poem written by Alyssa, which illustrated her fascination with self-harm. And she wrote in this poem, quote, "I cut to see blood because I like it." And underneath a blanket on the bed, a journal was found. The authorities have not released a lot of information about what this journal contained, but we know a little about it, enough. Alyssa had written disturbing things. She wrote about wanting to burn a house down while there was a family inside of it. She also talked about her emotions and her dark feelings, saying, quote, "If I don't talk about it, I bottle it up, and when I explode, someone's gonna die," end quote. That was written a week before little Elizabeth Olten went missing, and on October 21st, the day 9-year-old Elizabeth had walked away from her house and never returned, the police found Alyssa's final diary entry. The entire entry had been scratched out with blue ink, leaving only the words, "K, I gotta go to church now, LOL." But back at the lab, authorities used a blacklight to decipher the rest. The words that Alyssa Bustamante had scratched out of her journal with blue pen on the day Elizabeth Olten went missing are as follows. Quote, "I just fucking killed someone. I strangled them and slit their throat and stabbed them. Now they're dead. It was amazing. As soon as you get over the, oh my God, I can't do this feeling, it's pretty enjoyable. I'm kind of nervous and shaky though right now. Okay, I gotta go to church now, LOL." What do you think about that, Dale Cooper? I know, man. That's pretty messed up. It's messed up. It's messed up, Dale. The next morning, Alyssa Bustamante was brought to FBI headquarters where she sat down for an interview with Sergeant David Rice. Rice decided to tell Alyssa what he had, the journal, and then he waited for her to respond. Sergeant Rice said, quote, "Silence is very effective during an interview or interrogation because people feel very uncomfortable in silence. There were pauses, I believe, that were up to 45 seconds to a minute long, and you could see the stress affecting Alyssa. You could see her eyes begin to tremor and her head begin to shake," end quote. I mean, she's a 15-year-old girl. I know she's probably evil, okay? But she's a 15-year-old girl. Usually it doesn't take much to scare them, especially the psychopaths whose greatest fear really is getting caught. Sergeant Rice claims that once he brought up the journal, he could see a distinct shift in Alyssa's demeanor, and at that point he believed that she knew she'd been found out. At first, Alyssa claimed that she and Elizabeth had been walking in the woods when Elizabeth fell and then just died instantly. That was what she said. They were walking, Elizabeth fell, and then she died. Patiently, Sergeant Rice explained to Alyssa that once they recovered Elizabeth's body, an autopsy was going to show them every injury on her body. An autopsy would show how Elizabeth had actually died. Finally, Sergeant Rice asked Alyssa directly if Elizabeth's throat had been slit, recalling Alyssa's words in her journal, and Alyssa responded, yes. At that point, her grandmother Karen, who'd been sitting next to her during this interview, began to cry, and she had to get up and leave the room. Later, Karen Brooke would claim she was upset that the police continued with their interrogation after she left, since Alyssa was a minor. So as sympathetic as I am to Karen's plight, yes, Alyssa was a minor, but she basically just confessed to slitting a 9-year-old girl's throat. So maybe Karen thought getting up and leaving the room would stop the interview so that Alyssa would not implicate herself any further. And so Karen was upset when that didn't happen. But when a bomb's dropped like that, and then you, Karen, decided to get up and leave the room for whatever reason, A, because you wanted the interview to stop and you didn't want Alyssa to dig herself deeper, or B, because it was horrifying and you couldn't be present to hear it. I mean, how do you think Elizabeth Olten's family feels. You should have stayed there if you wanted to be present during the interview. And I know there's going to be people out there who disagree with me and they're like, absolutely not. That's not the law. But when you have something like this and you have a 9-year-old who's missing, probably dead, and then you have a 15-year-old who's writing about how she gets off on killing people in her journal and then happily skipping off to church, and then that 15-year-old is like, yeah, actually, I am the one that killed Elizabeth. Yeah, her throat was slit. And then Karen's just going to walk out, like that's just going to put an end to it. Like, oh, redo. I'm going to come back in here. We'll start this interview from the beginning. It bothers me. So I know there's going to be people that disagree with me, and I welcome it, and you are more than welcome to disagree with me. We can still be friends if we don't have the same opinions. Alyssa Bustamante finally told the truth. She said she had convinced her little sister Emma to lure Elizabeth Olten out of her home, and once Emma had delivered Elizabeth to her, Alyssa instructed her sister to go back home. Once they were alone, Alyssa told little Elizabeth that she had something cool to show her, but they would need to walk through the woods for about 15 minutes. And excited to see this cool thing that Emma's cool big sister had to show her, Elizabeth agreed because she liked Alyssa. She trusted Alyssa. She'd played with Alyssa before. She looked up to Alyssa. So Alyssa Bustamante held Elizabeth Olten's hand as they walked through the woods, and Alyssa led Elizabeth not to something cool that a 9-year-old would want to see, but to a pre-dug grave. The Friday before this, Alyssa had gotten on the school bus as normal and arrived at school in the morning like any other weekday, but she never actually made it into the building. Instead, she had walked back to the woods behind her house and dug 2 graves, already knowing that she was going to be taking a life. That makes this murder premeditated. Then Alyssa went back to school and took the afternoon bus home like any other day. In her room, police found muddy jeans and clothes and 2 shovels with dirt on them. Alyssa had also planned ahead with the murder weapon, grabbing a knife from her grandmother's kitchen and hiding it in her book bag. When they arrived at the pre-dug grave, Alyssa removed the knife, and while 9-year-old Elizabeth was facing her, Alyssa began to strangle her with her own bare hands. Alyssa then took the kitchen knife and stabbed Elizabeth in the chest 7 times before slicing her throat from ear to ear and pushing her into the grave, covering her with dirt and leaves, and then walking away to let her die alone in that hole and go write in her journal about how awesome the experience had been, and then skipping off to church like a good little girl. Alyssa led police to the spot where she had left Elizabeth. She knew exactly where it was, and Sergeant Rice said, quote, "It was not well covered. Once she pointed out the area and you looked a little bit closer, you could see she was only a few inches, if that, under the ground, and you could see body parts that came up covered with mud." End quote. If that's the case, how'd all your searchers and your helicopters and your cadaver dogs miss Elizabeth? What's going on here, Sergeant Rice? What's going on? Now, it looked as if Alyssa Bustamante had been thinking about this and planning this for some time. If you remember, prior to this, at her 15th birthday party, Alyssa had told her friend Jennifer that she wondered what it would be like to see the life drain out of someone and to have that kind of power to take life away from another person. Alyssa did something that very few women do, and even less children do. The method she had chosen to kill was brutal, violent, up close and personal. She looked her victim in the face as she killed her. She wanted to be hands-on, and she didn't want to just strangle Elizabeth. She wanted to stab her and slice her and inflict as much pain and terror as she possibly could on 9-year-old Elizabeth Olten. This kind of murder is usually seen in older, violent criminals who have psychopathic tendencies, and usually they are men. So Alyssa Bustamante is a very rare case.
Authorities say it was in a wooded area where Alyssa Bustamante dug 2 holes in the ground to be used as a grave. Olten's disappearance last October sparked a massive search, with hundreds of volunteers scouring the area, and her older sister making this emotional plea for her safe return.
We just want my little sister home safely, and I don't know who would have done anything.
Police say there was no provocation in the killing. When they asked Bustamante why, all she said was that she wanted to know what it felt like.
9-year-old Elizabeth Olten loved music, especially Hannah Montana and Taylor Swift. Her aunt said that being around Elizabeth was, quote, like when you see the morning sun pop over the mountain. That's what she was. She was sunshine, and you can't help but love her, end quote. Elizabeth had never met an animal she didn't like. She was especially fond of cats and horses, and some of her favorite things to do were baking with her mother Patty, doing puzzles, and playing dress-up with her stuffed animals. And on Wednesday, October 28, 2009, 9-year-old Elizabeth Olten was laid to rest in a pink coffin carried by a horse-drawn carriage to the cemetery. She was a princess. Mourners wore pink, her favorite color, and released balloons, and as the casket was lowered into the ground, those in attendance could not stop the tears from falling from their eyes. Unfortunately, there were 2 members of Elizabeth's family who were unable to say their goodbyes. Her father, Dale Olten Sr., and her brother, Dale Olten Jr., who were both behind bars on burglary charges at Northeast Correctional Center in Bowling Green, Missouri. The 2 men had tried to get a furlough to attend the funeral, but they were denied, and that's really another sad slice of the story. Elizabeth was taken from her mother, Patty, who'd already lost so much, a husband and a son in prison, and Patty didn't even have her husband to lean on during this time to take some of the burden from her, because, when you have something happen to your child, having a spouse there to take some of the weight, to handle some of the attention, to be a point of comfort and understanding for you, since this is the only other person in the world who can understand the loss you're feeling, it's helpful, and Patty just didn't have that. And Dale Sr. and Dale Jr. never knew that the last time they saw Elizabeth before going to prison was actually the last time they were ever going to see her, and they were unable to say their proper goodbyes. And that is the butterfly effect that violent crime has. It's not just the victim, but the victim's family members, the perpetrator's family members, and the community as a whole. So many people are affected by the ripple effect of one person's actions. Alyssa Bustamante was charged with first-degree murder, and even though she had confessed and led police to the location of her victim's body, she entered a not guilty plea because, why not? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right?
All right.
As 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante was arraigned for the vicious murder of 9-year-old Elizabeth Olten. The teenager, wearing green jail garb, hid her face behind heavy bangs as her lawyer spoke for her.
We're here today for the purposes of arraignment on the charge. Mr. King?
Ms. Bustamante will waive formal arraignment and enter pleas of not guilty.
All right.
On November 18th, 2009, Alyssa was certified as an adult. So basically, they wanted to charge her as an adult because they believed that this was a crime of the adult nature. Cole County Circuit Judge John Beadham ruled that her crime had been vicious and the state's juvenile facilities were not adequate to deal with someone who would commit such a crime. And you really have to look at this. We have to feel bad for Alyssa for a minute because she's only 15. And then we have to understand that this probably was the best call because Alyssa killed Elizabeth just for the thrill of it, to see what it felt like. And while there's never a good motive for murder, this one would have to be the most pointless and senseless and selfish of them all. So it probably wouldn't be a great idea to put Alyssa in some minimum security juvenile facility with other young people who she could potentially hurt if the urge to kill came over her again. After this, Alyssa was transferred to the Cole County Jail, where she would be held without bond as she waited for her trial. The trial was to be held in Jefferson County, but the jury would be selected from Greene County, which was about 3.5 hours away. I assume they did this in an attempt to try and counter the publicity of this case, hoping that residents of these neighboring counties would be less aware of the crime and also less attached to the victim of the crime, because as I said, this was a small town. St. Martin's was small, everyone knew everyone, everyone loved Elizabeth, and I agree that Alyssa probably would not have gotten a fair trial if the jury had been selected from within her own community, the same community that had just cried at the gravesite of her 9-year-old victim. In preparation for the trial, the prosecution took the knife used in the murder as well as Alyssa's clothes for DNA testing, but the test they performed consumed the whole sample, so the defense team was unable to conduct their own independent DNA testing. The defense did have a win, though, if you can consider it that. I mean, it's not a win for Elizabeth, it's a win for Alyssa. A judge ruled that part of Alyssa's statements to the police would be inadmissible in court. Judge Patricia Joyce claimed that a juvenile officer named Toby Mayer wrongly participated in the interview of Alyssa, and she used deceptive tactics while encouraging the teen to tell the truth about what had happened to Elizabeth Olten. Judge Joyce stated, quote, Miss Mayer used deceptive tactics during the interrogation of a defendant by telling the defendant that she was there as her advocate. This deception likely misled the defendant into believing that Miss Mayer was there to look after her best interests when in fact this was not her role. End quote. Apparently the role of the juvenile officer is to observe and make sure the juvenile's rights are protected, but apparently also Toby Mayer was urging Alyssa to tell the truth, and allegedly she also told Alyssa that the juvenile court's only focus was treatment, which implied that Alyssa would not be facing adult punishments for her actions. I don't know how much I agree with this judge's ruling, because when Toby Mayer told Alyssa, like, the only role of the juvenile court is, rehabilitation, we want to help you, we want to treat you, she was right, but she wasn't speaking for law enforcement. She wasn't speaking for the police. Now, I understand how Alyssa may have been under the impression that Toby Mayer was saying, just let us know what you did and we'll make sure you get help. But also, did Alyssa really think that she was going to brutally murder a 9-year-old girl and then just spend like a year in juvie and all would be forgiven and forgotten? I mean, come on. So when the judge said this about Toby Mayer, it was in reference to a portion of Alyssa's interview that has never been released or revealed. And I don't think I'm alone here when I say I need to know what Alyssa said in that interview that was suppressed. Because what we do know already that she said is bone-chilling. So I honestly can't imagine how bad this was. What did she say in the interview that her defense team fought so hard to get suppressed and the judge actually did suppress it? What was said? I need to know. For over a year, Alyssa Bustamante stood by her not guilty plea, but on January 9th, 2012, she withdrew her not guilty plea and agreed to plead guilty to a lesser charge of second-degree murder. She made this decision the day before her trial started. So basically, Alyssa was given a plea deal, first-degree murder off the table, and she waived her right to a jury trial. But as a condition of her plea deal, Alyssa needed to get up in front of the courtroom and go through the events of that fateful day when Elizabeth Olten was brutally ripped from this world. The court was filled with family members of both Alyssa and Elizabeth, as well as many locals who just wanted to witness the murder trial of a child, basically. They didn't think that they would ever have a chance to see a 15-year-old on trial for murder. Again, these are cases that become historical. Not so much now, though, right? It feels like every other month or something we hear about some 15 or 16 or 13-year-old doing something absolutely terrible. The Seattle Times wrote, quote, Alyssa Bustamante looked down, her long brown hair covering her teenage eyes. I'm sorry, I have to interrupt. What exactly are teenage eyes? This writer needs to be fired. Her teenage eyes? The article goes on to say, quote, as a judge read the charges against her, murder and armed criminal action for knowingly strangling, cutting, and stabbing her 9-year-old neighbor, end quote. But when Alyssa was seated in the witness box and asked to tell the court what she had done, she stared straight ahead. She spoke in a clear, even voice, untinged by any emotion at all. She said she had strangled Elizabeth with her hands and used the knife for the rest of the attack. And while most people in the courtroom already knew the gruesome details, no one had ever heard it from Alyssa's own lips or in this very monotone way that she said it, which is incredibly creepy. Her testimony sent shockwaves through the watching crowd, eliciting gasps and sobs from those in attendance. Elizabeth's mother, Patty, cried silently as she sat through the testimony. She was wearing a purple shirt with a picture of her daughter on it and the words, "Justice for Elizabeth." Elizabeth's friends and family were outraged when they'd found out that Alyssa was not being charged with first-degree murder. as they should have been, right? Because the crime was obviously premeditated, and the prosecution had proof of premeditation, which makes it first-degree murder, but whatever. After court, prosecutor Mark Olsen would not answer questions about why he had decided to offer Alyssa the deal, but the Seattle Times wrote that several factors could have influenced the reduced charges. The legality of sentencing a teenage murderer to life in prison without parole is very much a gray area still, and as Alyssa's trial was going on, the Supreme Court was actually getting ready to hear arguments in a different case involving two 14-year-old killers who'd been convicted in Arkansas and Alabama. The Supreme Court needed to decide if life in prison could be considered cruel and unusual punishment for teenagers. Ben Trachtenberg, a law professor at Columbia, he felt that the prosecution may have given the plea deal to Alyssa just to take that sentence off the table, the life in prison sentence, and not have to keep going back and forth to court on the multiple appeals that Alyssa would most likely file, especially if the Supreme Court ruled it was cruel and unusual to put a teenage murderer behind bars for life. I also want to go on the record as saying that I think it's sad to put a teenage murderer behind bars for life, but I don't think it's cruel and unusual. I think it's called consequences. The consequences should match the crime. And I'm not talking about like vehicular manslaughter or accidental things. I'm talking about specifically what we're talking about here with Alyssa's case. That deserves life in prison. Alyssa's defense team brought in multiple experts who testified that she was not in her right mind at the time of the murder. The defense witnesses claimed that Alyssa suffered from major depression, she displayed features of borderline personality disorder, and she was showing early signs of bipolar disorder. That's a lot of diagnoses, right? Lots of them, especially for somebody as young as Alyssa. A psychiatrist testified that Alyssa's prescribed depression medicine may have also contributed to her violent behavior. Her Prozac dosage had been increased just 2 weeks before the murder, and this may have made Alyssa more prone to unpredictable behavior and violence. But Dr. Anthony Rothschild, the main prosecution witness, he, on the second day of trial, said that was nonsense. It was nonsense that too much Prozac would turn Alyssa into a murderer, since the medication has been known and proven to reduce hostility and anger in people like Alyssa who suffered from depression or borderline personality disorder. The defense needed to prove that Alyssa was not in her right mind at the time of the murder, that she did not know what she was doing was wrong. But given the diary entry written directly after the murder, given the premeditation of digging the two graves, of stealing a knife, and of luring her victim into the woods, that was essentially impossible to do. Alyssa's grandmother, Karen, remembered that on the night of the murder, Alyssa was in better spirits than usual while they were getting ready to go to church. She had a pep in her step, and she was dancing and singing. Because Alyssa, like so many others who kill for the thrill of it, she was riding high on a wave of euphoric adrenaline that she'd received after brutally killing another human being. Psychology Today says that thrill killers, quote, come to crave the euphoric adrenaline rush provided by stalking and capturing their victims. The primary motive of thrill killers is to induce pain or terror in their victims prior to killing them, which provides intense stimulation and excitement, end quote. Some infamous thrill killers include Israel Keyes, Leopold and Loeb, and now Alyssa Bustamante. At the end of the day, most of the doctors who testified, even the defense witnesses, said that Alyssa knew right from wrong, and she was found guilty. On February 6th, Alyssa was in court again for her sentencing hearing, and Mark Richardson, the prosecutor, made an impassioned plea to the judge to hand down the highest sentence, life in prison. Mark Richardson said, quote, the motive has to be the most senseless, most reprehensible there could be in humankind, and that is to take a life for a thrill, end quote. I agree. Thank you, Mark Richardson. I agree. Richardson talked about the hundreds of people who had been searching for Elizabeth Olten, the man-hours, the resources used to locate her, the terror and sadness of her family in those days when Elizabeth was missing. And while hundreds of people in the community were searching for Elizabeth, Alyssa went skipping off to a church dance, buzzing from her temporary high. Mark Richardson urged the judge to hand down the maximum sentence for second-degree murder, which is life in prison with the possibility of parole and an additional 71 years for armed criminal action. 71 years would have been Elizabeth Olten's remaining life expectancy. The judge listened and then said that she would announce the sentence the next day, at which point Elizabeth's grandmother, who was sitting in her wheelchair in the courtroom, shouted out, I think Alyssa should get out of jail the same day Elizabeth gets out of the grave. Can we have a round of applause? Can we have a round of applause for Elizabeth's grandmother in her wheelchair still being a bad bitch? On February 8th, Alyssa addressed the court once more, saying, quote, "I really am extremely very sorry for everything. I know words can never be enough, and they can never adequately describe how horribly I feel for all of this. If I could give my life to get her back, I would. I'm sorry." End quote. I don't believe you, Alyssa. I believe you might be sorry. I believe that she was sorry. She was sorry she got caught. She may have even, at some point, felt a little sorry that she had killed Elizabeth. But I don't think she would give her life to get Elizabeth back. Elizabeth's mother later told reporters that she did not believe Alyssa was sorry. She was just saying words her defense team had coached her to say. Alyssa was then sentenced to life in prison. Several months after the trial, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that juveniles cannot face automatic life sentence without the possibility of parole, but Alyssa had the possibility of parole. She appealed anyway, claiming her original lawyers were ineffective. The judge ruled that Alyssa's request to set aside her guilty plea and her sentence was meritless, and her original attorneys had not been deficient. In fact, I do believe they put on the best defense for her possible, given the fact of what they were dealing with, which was pretty much a very unsympathetic figure who had confessed to everything in a very cold-blooded sort of way. Like the police and stuff who talked to her, the ones who interviewed her, these are grown-ass men who have seen some things in their lives, in their law enforcement careers, and they said that talking to her and hearing the way that she described what happened, it chilled them. Like they were freaked out by it, creeped out by it. The judge also said that the evidence against Alyssa was both strong and aggravating. Mark Richardson, the county court prosecutor, said that Alyssa had committed an adult-like crime, so she had been given an adult-like sentence, and justice had been served. In June of 2021, a national crime victim advocacy group petitioned Missouri Governor Mike Parson to veto a criminal justice bill, Senate Bill 26, which deals with several public safety issues, but also included in the bill was a change to the state's parole rules. It would allow a person convicted of a crime who was sentenced to at least a 15-year sentence when they were a minor to ask for parole after 15 years of incarceration. An online petition was started on behalf of Elizabeth Olten's family because if that bill would pass, then Alyssa would be eligible for it. Alyssa is supposed to have a parole hearing in 2044, but if SB 26 went through, she'd be eligible in 2027. And if the law or whoever's making these parole decisions decided to measure the time that Alyssa had been in prison from the moment of incarceration, like when she was jailed before her trial, she could be getting parole as early as 2024. The statement from this group said, quote, "Bustamante fantasized about murdering people, devised a plan to murder Elizabeth, and then carried out the murder. She poses a significant risk and should not be allowed to victimize others ever again." End quote. By the way, the bill passed in the Senate 23-9, so there's that. Another odd thing is there's a pretty active Alyssa Bustamante fan club online because, of course, the internet has brought us many magical things, but it has also brought together large swaths of people who can connect on their obsessive idolization of murderers like Chris Watts and Ted Bundy, who I think we can all agree are two people only a mother could love. You have people writing that the state is ruining Alyssa's life and taking away her chance to be a mother by keeping her in prison. Can you imagine? Alyssa Bustamante, a mother. Can you imagine? Yes, every murderer who chooses a 9-year-old as their victim should definitely just plan on getting pregnant ASAP. People are out there creating artwork of Alyssa. There's a fan page on Facebook and all these social media accounts of people emulating her, using her name, using her profile picture, and then like posting on Twitter and stuff as if they were her. It's all very macabre, but basically that's where we're at. And when I say that's where we're at, I mean that's where we're at in the video with the case, but that's also where we're at in society, where murderers are literally looked up to as these pop culture figures. They get these cult followings. It's very bizarre, but where's Elizabeth Olten's fan club? Where's Elizabeth Olten's artwork? Where's Elizabeth Olten's supporters on the internet talking about how, maybe Alyssa stole Elizabeth's opportunity to become a mother, or to graduate from high school, or to get her first kiss, or to walk down the aisle towards her waiting husband or wife, or whatever she decided to do. Where's Elizabeth Olten's cult following? That's what I want to know. So I know there's some of you that probably feel like I went a little hard on Alyssa Bustamante in this video. That is your opinion. You're entitled to it. We all have different life experiences that lead us to develop the core values that we have as adults. My core values are don't kill people, okay? Do whatever else you want, but don't hurt anyone. You can do whatever you want. You can be whoever you want. You can walk around with a zebra hat on all the time that you've named Ted and you decorate for different holidays. I will not judge you for anything. The second you hurt another person for your own selfish needs, that's when I don't care about you anymore. There's enough good people in this world for me to give my, advocacy to, my love to, my attention to, without having to extend it now to people that just hurt other people simply to do it, simply for the thrill of it. And I truly, truly believe, 1,000,000%, that if Alyssa had not been caught for what happened to Elizabeth Olten, she would have killed again. Alyssa has been referred to in many psychological profiles when talking about female psychopaths, and I believe that's exactly what she is. I don't think this is a run-of-the-mill sort of, one-time accidental thing. Her own psychiatrists said that she got enjoyment and pleasure out of hurting other people. And at the end of the day, although Alyssa may have been clinically depressed, she was taking medication, that part of her issues could have been helped with proper counseling and therapy and medication. But I don't believe she was mentally ill in the way where it makes her criminally not responsible, because psychopathy is a personality disorder. It's not a mental illness. And this girl has a personality disorder. There's no cure for psychopathy. They can't be rehabilitated. They can't be, changed. They can't be made to be better. You just pretty much have to lock them up and keep them away from society. And I do believe that's what has to happen with Alyssa. And I mean, Alyssa has appealed her sentence and her conviction more than once at this point. So clearly she's itching to get out. She's itching to get out so that she can just blend back into society. Will she kill again after being in prison this long? I don't know. Will that be enough of a deterrent for her not to? Probably not. Not if she's an actual psychopath. Punishment doesn't deter actual psychopaths, especially when they are not given the full punishment that they're supposed to be given. They think that they can get away with anything. They think that they are smarter than everybody and they're above everyone else. And Alyssa, allegedly, in my opinion, might think, hey, me being able to convince these people that I was just this innocent 15-year-old girl who had a hard life. Yes, we're sorry for that, Alyssa. We are very sorry. That sucks. However, look at your two younger brothers and your little sister who all experienced the same things, who all had this very rough start and turned out to be, pretty good kids. Look at all the other hundreds and thousands of people out there who go through what you went through, Alyssa. And oftentimes worse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, just torture at the hands of parents and adults who don't grow up to slit the throat of a 9-year-old girl. So that's not an excuse for me. It never will be. We'll just have to see what happens. If Alyssa gets out, though, I can tell you what, I'm going to be locking my door up a little tighter at night, especially after this video, because you might not like what I have to say. So that is it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. I hope that this is thought-provoking and is going to make a lot of interesting conversations in the comment section, debates that I can jump in on. Be respectful to each other. Be respectful to yourself. It's a very sad case. It's sad for everybody involved. I feel horrible for Elizabeth. I do have sympathy for Alyssa for what she went through in her life. That sucks. Anytime a kid is neglected or abused or doesn't just get to have this very light-hearted, carefree childhood that they deserve and that every kid should have, it's heartbreaking to me. And I wish I could go back in time and just find little, 6-year-old Alyssa and scoop her up and take her away from it all and get her ice cream and bring her to the beach and let her put her little toes in the sand and swim in the water and just be carefree and happy and grow up to have a normal life. But I don't even know if that would have been enough for someone like her. I don't know. Thank you guys so much for being here. I'm so happy that we are, plowing through plowing through Harloween. The next video I have is so interesting, guys. I hope you watch it. I know you might look at the title and you might be like, this isn't up my alley, but trust me, it's crazy. It gets creepy. So many interesting things. I learned so much from researching this next video. I'm so excited to bring it to you guys. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. I'll wait. Hit the subscribe button because there's a lot of you who watch regularly who aren't subscribed. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the like button if you liked it. Hit the share button if you think it's worth sharing. Don't forget to follow Crime Weekly, my podcast that I co-host every single week with ex-police detective Derek Levasseur. It's on audio platforms every Friday and on YouTube every Wednesday. Links are in the description, as is the link for Magellan TV for you to get your free 1-month trial. Thank you so much for being here. Stay kind, stay beautiful, and stay spooky. I'll see you very soon. Bye.
Going straight down, and that river runs deep. The mountains get steep, and the voices getting too loud. All these feelings I've buried, it's looking like a cemetery. They're coming back from the grave, calling out my name. Better say I Hail Mary. Well, you don't know how deep it goes until it's killing you slowly. So you got to let it go. I got blood on the strings.